The security camera footage was crystal clear. My stepfather's hand reaching into the cash register at my electronics store, slipping $300 into his jacket pocket while I was supposedly in the back room. But I wasn't in the back room. I was watching everything unfold on my phone from the office upstairs, the live feed showing me exactly what kind of man my mother had married. For 23 years, I'd been the family disappointment. The kid who barely graduated high school while my step-siblings got full rides to USC and Stanford. The one who started a little electronics repair shop, instead of pursuing a real career like law or medicine. Every family gathering was a reminder of how I'd never measure up to the golden children, how I was just my mother's charity case from her first marriage. But now I had something they didn't know about. My little shop had grown into 3 locations across Orange County, pulling in mid-6 figures annually. I'd been planning to announce it at my stepfather's retirement party next week, my gift to the man who'd raised me despite my obvious shortcomings. The same man who was currently stealing from me because he thought I was too stupid to notice. See, Richard had always been careful about his image. Respected high school principal, pillar of the Newport Beach community, the kind of guy who gave speeches about integrity and character. He'd built his reputation on being better than everyone else, especially better than the broken family he'd rescued when he married my mother. I saved the footage to 3 different drives. Then I called my mom and asked if I could give a speech at Richard's retirement party. She was thrilled. Finally, her disappointing son wanted to honor his stepfather publicly. She had no idea I was about to honor him with the truth. The party was in 6 days. I had 6 days to decide whether to destroy a man who'd spent 2 decades destroying me, piece by piece, in front of everyone who mattered to him. My mother, Linda, met Richard when I was 3 and she was barely keeping us afloat on a waitress salary in Huntington Beach. Richard swept in like some suburban knight in shining armor, stable job, nice house in Newport Beach, promises of private schools and college funds. For my mom, it wasn't love as much as it was salvation. She'd grown up poor in East LA and saw Richard as her ticket to the kind of life she'd only dreamed about. Richard already had 2 kids from his first marriage, Ashley and Brandon, who split time between our house and their mother's mansion in Laguna Hills. From day one, it was clear where everyone stood in the family hierarchy. Ashley was the star debate team captain destined for pre-law at Stanford. Brandon was the varsity quarterback with a 4.2 GPA heading to USC on academic scholarships. Then there was me, the kid who couldn't sit still in class and preferred taking apart electronics to reading books. I'll never forget the night of Ashley's high school graduation party. Richard rented out the private dining room at the resort at Pelican Hill, invited half of Newport Beach society. I was 13, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, trying to stay invisible in the corner. During his toast, Richard went on and on about Ashley's achievements, how proud he was to call her his daughter, how she represented everything their family stood for. Then he looked at me and said, "And we're hopeful that Marcus will find his own path someday, even if it's not quite as ambitious as his sister's." The whole room chuckled politely. Ashley shot me a sympathetic look, but I caught Richard's expression when he thought no one was watching, this little smirk, like he'd just put me exactly where I belonged. That night, I understood that I wasn't really part of his family. I was his wife's baggage that he tolerated for appearances. The pattern repeated through high school. Parent-teacher conferences where Richard would introduce Ashley and Brandon as my children and me as Linda's boy. Family photos where somehow I always ended up positioned slightly apart from everyone else. The time Richard forgot to include me in the family Christmas card and had to Photoshop me in later, badly, so it looked like I was floating next to the group. But the worst was my high school graduation. I'd managed to graduate, barely, despite my undiagnosed ADHD that no one bothered to address because Richard didn't believe in making excuses. We went to dinner at the Cannery in Newport Beach, not exactly Pelican Hill level, but nice enough. Richard raised his glass and said he was proud of all his children for their accomplishments. Then he listed Ashley's law school acceptance, Brandon's engineering scholarship, and ended with, "And Marcus, well, we're proud that you made it across the finish line." Made it across the finish line. Like I was some wounded animal that had barely survived. The grand gesture had been brewing for months. See, Richard was retiring after 30 years as principal of Corona del Mar High School. The school board was throwing him a huge retirement party at the Newport Beach Country Club. His former colleagues, current staff, school board members, half the town's elite families whose kids he'd shepherded through high school. My mom had been planning for weeks, wanting everything to be perfect for her Richard. I'd been quietly building my electronics repair business for 5 years, starting with fixing phones in my garage apartment. But what started as phone repairs had evolved into corporate IT consulting, security system installations, even some contracts with local businesses for data recovery services. 3 locations now: Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, and Irvine. 22 employees. Revenue that would make Richard's principal salary look like pocket money. My secret wasn't just the business success, it was that I'd been planning to surprise Richard at his retirement party. I'd prepared a whole presentation about how his guidance and support had inspired me to build something meaningful, how grateful I was for everything he'd taught me about integrity and hard work. I'd even had a custom plaque made, to Richard Chin, who taught me that character matters most. But watching him steal from me changed everything. Here was the man who'd spent 20 years lecturing me about responsibility and respect, who'd made me feel worthless for not meeting his standards, casually pocketing my money like it was his right. Comment below and let me know where you're watching this from. I want to know how far this story reaches and whether family dynamics like this exist everywhere or if this is just a Southern California special kind of dysfunction. The Newport Beach Country Club was Richard's natural habitat. Manicured lawns, ocean views, and the kind of old-money California elegance that made people like my mother feel simultaneously grateful and inadequate. The retirement party was set for Saturday evening in the main ballroom, with cocktails on the terrace overlooking the Pacific. My mom had been in full event planning mode for weeks. She'd coordinated with the school district, arranged for a professional photographer, even hired a small jazz quartet because Richard loved sophisticated music. This was her moment to shine as the principal's wife, to show Newport Beach society that the waitress from East LA belonged in their world. I'd spent the week wrestling with what to do about the security footage. Part of me wanted to confront Richard privately, give him a chance to explain. But every time I watched that video, the casual way he looked around before reaching into my register, the practiced smoothness of the theft, I knew this wasn't his first time. He'd been stealing from me, probably for months, because he assumed I was too stupid or careless to notice. The day of the party, I drove to my Newport Beach location to pick up the final payment reports. Richard's car was in the parking lot next door at Starbucks. He'd developed this routine over the past few months, stopping by my shop every Thursday around 2 p.m. when I was supposedly at my other locations. Today wasn't Thursday, but I guess retirement had given him more flexibility in his schedule. I parked across the street and waited. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Richard emerged from my shop, walked to his BMW, and drove away. I checked my phone app, another $150 missing from today's drawer. The man had brass balls, I'd give him that. At home, the house buzzed with pre-party energy. Ashley had flown in from her law firm in San Francisco, looking polished in her designer dress and Louboutin heels. Brandon drove up from his engineering job in San Diego, tan and confident in his tailored suit. Even Richard's ex-wife, Patricia, would be attending. They'd maintained this weirdly cordial relationship that somehow made my mom even more insecure. "Marcus, honey, you look nice," my mom said, adjusting my tie. She'd bought me the suit herself, worried I'd show up in khakis and a polo shirt to Richard's big night. "Are you still planning to say something during the speeches?" "Definitely," I said, patting the USB drive in my jacket pocket. "I've got something really special prepared." Richard appeared in the hallway, adjusting his cufflinks. Even at 65, he looked like Central Casting's version of a distinguished educator, silver hair perfectly styled, wire-rimmed glasses, that authoritative bearing that had intimidated thousands of teenagers over the years. He looked at me with his usual expression of mild disappointment. "Marcus, I hope you've prepared something appropriate," he said. "There will be a lot of important people there tonight." "Oh, it's appropriate," I said. "Very appropriate for the occasion." The drive to the country club was tense. Richard spent the entire time coaching my mom on which school board members to charm, which donors to thank, how to navigate the political dynamics of Newport Beach education circles. Ashley and Brandon flanked them in the back seat like perfectly programmed wingmen, occasionally offering strategic insights about managing public appearances. I followed in my own car, a Tesla Model S that I'd bought 6 months ago but kept parked in my garage apartment because I wasn't ready to answer questions about where electronics repair guy got Tesla money. Tonight felt like the right time to debut it. The country club's valet looked confused when I pulled up. "Are you here for the Chen retirement party?" he asked, clearly wondering if the electronics guy had gotten lost on his way to a different event. "That's the one," I said, handing him my keys. Family of the guest of honor. Inside, the party was everything my mother had dreamed it would be. The ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers, the terrace buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses, and Richard held court like the king of Newport Beach education. Former students, now successful adults, lined up to thank him for changing their lives. School board members praised his vision and leadership. Even the mayor showed up to present a key to the city. I nursed a whiskey and watched Richard work the room, accepting congratulations and telling self-deprecating stories about his decades in education. He was good at this, the humble public servant, the dedicated educator, the man who'd shaped young minds with integrity and wisdom. Everyone loved Principal Chen. But then I caught him in a quiet moment by the bar, and I saw something else. The way his eyes constantly scanned the room, calculating who was watching, who mattered, who could still be useful to him. This wasn't a celebration for Richard, it was a performance. Ashley appeared beside me. "Dad's in his element," she said, following my gaze. "You should go congratulate him before the speeches start." "Oh, I will," I said. "I'm planning to give him exactly what he deserves." Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers and your support really helps us get these stories out there. The speeches began at 8:30. The school board president went first, praising Richard's transformative leadership and dedication to excellence. The superintendent followed with statistics about test scores and college admission rates during Richard's tenure. A former student, now a successful doctor, spoke tearfully about how Principal Chen had believed in her when no one else did. Then it was family time. Ashley delivered a flawless tribute about the father who'd taught her to pursue excellence without compromise. Brandon talked about the man who'd shown him that leadership meant serving others. My mother spoke last among the family members, her voice shaking with emotion as she thanked Richard for giving her and her son a real home, a real family, and real hope for the future. And finally, the MC announced, "We'd like to invite Marcus Chen, Richard's stepson, to share some words." I walked to the podium, USB drive in hand, and looked out at the sea of faces. 200 people who thought they knew exactly who Richard Chen was. Who thought they knew exactly who I was too, the disappointing stepkid who'd barely made it through high school, who fixed phones for a living while his siblings conquered the professional world. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began. "Richard has been a part of my life for 20 years now, and I've learned so much from watching him. About integrity. About character. About the difference between who we appear to be and who we really are." I saw Richard's smile falter slightly. He was probably worried I'd ramble or embarrass him with some awkward personal story. See, most of you know me as the family underachiever. The kid who barely graduated, who never went to college, who ended up fixing electronics while Ashley and Brandon became lawyers and engineers. And for years, I believed that narrative. I believed I was exactly as disappointing as Richard thought I was. My mother looked confused. Ashley and Brandon exchanged glances. Richard's jaw was tightening. "But here's what's interesting about being underestimated," I continued, connecting my laptop to the projection system. "People stop paying attention to what you're actually doing. They stop seeing you as a threat. They start making mistakes around you because they assume you're too stupid to notice." The screen behind me lit up with my business financial reports, revenue, profit margins, employee count, client testimonials. A collective gasp went through the room as people processed the numbers. My little electronics repair shop has generated $1.2 million in revenue this year across 3 locations. We employ 22 people, including several Corona Del Mar graduates who Richard taught. We provide IT security consulting for half the businesses in this room. Richard had gone completely pale. My mother's hand was over her mouth. The room was dead silent. I've been planning this surprise for months, I said, my voice steady and clear. I wanted to thank Richard publicly for everything he'd taught me about building a life of integrity. I even had a plaque made honoring his guidance and support. I clicked to the next slide, a photo of the custom plaque I'd commissioned, with its inscription about character and integrity. But then something interesting happened last Thursday. Richard stopped by my Newport Beach location while I was supposedly at another store. Except I wasn't at another store. I was upstairs in the office, watching the security feed. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I clicked again, and the security footage began playing on the big screen, crystal clear video of Richard looking around nervously, then reaching into the cash register and pocketing the money. "That's $300, I said conversationally, as if I were discussing the weather. But it wasn't the first time. Richard's been stealing from my business for months. Small amounts, nothing I'd notice if I weren't paying attention. But I pay attention to everything now." Someone in the audience gasped. I heard chairs scraping as people turned to look at Richard, who was standing frozen by his table, his face a mask of panic and rage. "So I find myself in an interesting position," I continued. "Do I stay quiet and let Richard continue being Newport Beach's respected educator? Do I protect the reputation of the man who spent 20 years teaching me that I wasn't good enough for his family?" I looked directly at Richard now, my voice calm but carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. Or do I do what Richard always said was most important? Tell the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people? Richard's mouth opened and closed like he was drowning. My mother was crying silently. Ashley looked like she might faint. "The man you've been honoring tonight has been stealing from his own stepson's business. The man who taught thousands of students about character and integrity has been lying to all of us for months, maybe years." I saved the presentation file and disconnected my laptop. I'm done protecting people who've never protected me. Enjoy the rest of your party. I walked off the podium and straight out of the ballroom, leaving behind 20 years of silence and 200 people who finally understood exactly who Richard Chin really was. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. By the time I reached my car in the country club parking lot, my phone was exploding with calls and texts. Ashley was calling frantically, Brandon was texting in all caps, and my mother had left 3 voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to yet. I drove to my Huntington Beach shop and sat in the parking lot for an hour, just processing what I'd done. 20 years of accumulated rage had poured out in 5 minutes, and there was no taking it back. Richard's reputation was destroyed. My mother's perfect life was shattered. The family I'd never really belonged to was officially blown apart. Around midnight, Ashley showed up. I saw her BMW pull into the parking lot, and she climbed out still wearing her cocktail dress and heels, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 3 hours. "Marcus, what the hell was that?" she demanded as I let her into the shop. "That was the truth," I said simply. "You destroyed him in front of everyone. The school board members, the mayor, his former students, everyone saw that footage. But maybe they should know who they've been celebrating all these years." Ashley stared at me like I was a stranger. "This isn't you, Marcus. You're not vindictive. You're not cruel. You don't know who I am, Ashley. None of you ever bothered to find out." She sat down heavily in one of my customer service chairs. "Mom's in the hospital. She had a panic attack in the parking lot. Brandon had to drive her to Hoag Emergency." The guilt hit me like a sledgehammer. Whatever Richard had done to me, my mother didn't deserve to pay the price. She genuinely loved him, had built her entire identity around being his wife, around finally belonging somewhere respectable. Is she okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally? Ashley shook her head. She keeps saying she doesn't understand how she missed it, how she didn't know. She's blaming herself for everything. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, Ashley spoke again. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. How long have you known? About the business, about your success?" I've been building it for 5 years. The real money started coming in about 2 years ago. 2 years, she repeated. You've been successful for 2 years, and you never told any of us. Would it have mattered? Would Richard have suddenly respected me? Would you and Brandon have started treating me like a real brother? Ashley's face crumpled. God, Marcus. We really screwed this up, didn't we? That's when the unexpected twist revealed itself. Ashley pulled out her phone and showed me a text thread she'd been having with Brandon during the drive to the hospital. Brandon just told me something, she said. Remember when Dad's first wife, Patricia, moved to Arizona 5 years ago? She didn't move for a job. She moved because she found out Dad had been embezzling money from the school's emergency fund. She gave him an ultimatum, resign quietly and pay it back, or she'd turn him in. I stared at the phone screen. He's been stealing from the school too? Patricia covered for him to protect Brandon and me. She couldn't bear the thought of her kids finding out their father was a thief. So she used her divorce settlement to pay back the missing money, and Richard agreed to retire at the end of this year instead of staying until he was 70 like he'd originally planned. Everything clicked into place. Richard's sudden interest in spending time around my shop. His insistence that I was finally growing up and taking responsibility. He hadn't been stealing from me out of contempt, he'd been stealing because he was desperate. Because Patricia's protection was ending and his debts were piling up. There's more, Ashley continued. Patricia's been paying his mortgage for 2 years. Mom doesn't know. She thinks the house is paid off from Dad's savings, but Patricia's been covering it to keep him from bankruptcy. The picture was becoming clear. Richard Chen, Newport Beach's respected educator, was completely broke. His entire lifestyle was funded by his ex-wife's guilt and my stolen cash. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I'm tired of secrets, Ashley said. Because I've spent my whole life thinking my father was perfect, and my brother was a disappointment, and now I'm finding out that everything I believed was backwards. Over the next few weeks, the truth continued to unfold. The school district launched an investigation into Richard's finances and found additional irregularities going back years. Parents started coming forward with stories about Richard demanding donations for various school programs that never quite materialized. The man who'd built his reputation on integrity had been running small-scale scams for most of his career. But the most surprising development was my mother's reaction. After the initial shock wore off, she didn't collapse into depression or denial. Instead, she got angry. Really angry. At Richard, at herself for enabling him, at the entire charade she'd been living. 20 years, she told me when she finally came to visit my shop. 20 years I let that man make me feel grateful for scraps. 20 years I watched him make you feel small, and I said nothing because I was so afraid of losing the life he'd given us. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I chose him over you, Marcus. Every time he put you down, every time he made you feel less than, I stayed quiet because I was terrified of going back to being poor and alone. I failed you as a mother. The healing process was complicated. Richard moved out of the house and eventually fled to Arizona to live with his sister, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a shattered reputation. My mother kept the house. It turned out Patricia had been paying the mortgage in Patricia's name as part of a complex financial arrangement, and Patricia decided to transfer ownership to my mother rather than dealing with Richard's creditors. Ashley left her law firm and moved back to Newport Beach to help Mom navigate the financial and legal mess. Brandon started driving up from San Diego every weekend. For the first time in 20 years, it felt like we might actually become a real family. I ended up hiring Ashley as my business attorney and Brandon as a consultant for expanding into commercial security systems. The electronics repair shop that Richard had dismissed as a hobby became the foundation for rebuilding our family's stability. The retirement party plaque ended up in my office, but I had the inscription changed. Now it reads, "Sometimes the truth is the only gift worth giving." 6 months later, I opened my 4th location. This time, my whole family was there for the ribbon cutting. My real family. Looking back now, I realized that night at the country club wasn't really about revenge. It was about finally refusing to be invisible in my own life. For 20 years, I'd accepted Richard's version of who I was, the disappointing stepkid who'd never amount to anything. I'd let his shame become my identity. But here's what I learned. The people who work hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones who feel smallest themselves. Richard's cruelty wasn't about my failures. It was about his own insecurity, his own fear of being exposed as a fraud. He needed me to be the family disappointment so he could feel like the family success. The business is thriving now. We just opened our 5th location in San Clemente, and we're looking at expanding into Arizona, partly because the market's good, but mostly because I like the irony of succeeding in the state where Richard ran to hide. My mother works part-time at the Newport Beach location, handling customer service and bookkeeping. She says it's the first job she's ever had where she feels proud of what she's building instead of grateful for what she's been given. Ashley's practice is growing too. Turns out there's good money in helping small business owners navigate the legal complexities of rapid expansion. Brandon's security consulting has evolved into a full partnership. We're now one of the premier commercial security firms in Orange County. Sometimes people ask if I regret destroying Richard's retirement party, if I wish I'd handled it differently. The answer is no. I regret waiting 20 years to speak up. I regret all the times I stayed quiet when I should have defended myself. I regret letting someone else define my worth for so long. But I don't regret telling the truth. Truth doesn't have an expiration date, and dignity doesn't have a statute of limitations. If you're living in someone else's shadow, if someone in your life has convinced you that you're not good enough, smart enough, worthy enough, listen to me, they're wrong. Your potential isn't determined by their opinion. Your success doesn't require their permission. Build something they can't ignore. Then decide whether they deserve to be part of what you've built. Thanks for watching, and if this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building the life you actually want. Drop a comment about your own experiences with family dynamics. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is just living well. But sometimes, the security footage doesn't hurt either.